Hi, everyone. So my name is Erica, and I'm a doctoral psychology intern at the Counseling Center. And I've been here since August, so I'm pretty new and I'm liking it so far. And I'm really excited to be talking about homesickness for international students. We'll talk about the impact of that, and then we'll talk about recommendations and ways to cope in the second part. See, my clicker's not working. Okay, maybe I'll just do that. All right, my clicker is not working, but we'll make it work. So we'll start off talking about what culture is, and then we'll talk about cultural adjustment and what that looks like, and some of the research behind that. And we'll talk about culture shock and some of the common reactions to culture shock. And then we'll talk about homesickness as well, because that's kind of a focus for today. And then we'll talk about recovery and adjustment too, which is a very big part of cultural adjustment. And then, like I mentioned, we'll talk about things you can do and keep in mind to try and help with the adjustment process when it comes to homesickness and culture shock and that kind of thing. And then we'll talk about resources. So when we think about culture, what do you think culture means to you? What do you think when you think about culture? And you could put something in the chat too, or you could raise your hand if you want to say something, but what does culture mean to you?
So for me, culture is a set of beliefs, traditions, all the things that people practice within society, including language, music, dance, costume, and things like that, all together make up the whole culture. Yeah, totally. So you mentioned a whole lot in that. Yeah, really good. So yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of culture. So another way to think about culture is, we have kind of an image here of an iceberg. And so there's external part of culture, and external culture is the things that we can see, the things we can hear, and the things that we can touch. Hi, welcome. So that could be like food and rituals and that kind of thing. And these are really conscious parts of cultures. And these are things that change a lot as you change environments. You can really see that everything you're hearing and seeing and touching changes. And then there's also the internal part of culture. And these are things that we don't necessarily see. So these can be like values, beliefs, like you were talking about, thought patterns and things like that. And, I think when we're thinking about changing environments and maybe changing cultures, it's the external part of changes are more obvious, and that's also an adjustment. But sometimes the internal part of culture is like the beliefs and the attitudes and all that people have. That's something we don't see, so that can sometimes be a harder part of culture to adjust to, and that kind of thing. So when it comes to cultural adjustment, this is a graph that's been talked about in terms of how people adjust, especially international students, when they move from one environment to another. And so the first part, if you could see, there's a part of the honeymoon phase. And this is usually like a lot of feelings of excitement and optimism. And you're just really excited to be in this new place because a lot of the time you've chosen to move. And so obviously there's a lot of excitement that comes with that. And then after that, maybe the reality of having moved kind of sinks in, and maybe you start missing home and your friends and your family. And then maybe stressors start to pop up, like academic stressors too. And so that could lead to the culture shock phase, which we'll talk about more later. And then after that, typically we could think about an adjustment phase where the intense feelings of culture shock and homesickness might settle down some as adjustment starts to happen. And then we could think about the mastery phase as feeling more comfort in the place you've moved to. And another thing to keep in mind too is that although this can be a helpful way to look at it, and it's also just helpful to see this because it just normalizes the whole thing. to think about adaptation and adjustment as a very normal process. And it's something that's completely normal and part of the whole process. And also just recognizing too that it might not be totally linear. And so even if you might feel like you're in the adjustment or mastery phase, there might still be times where you do feel homesick. So it's not necessarily about getting rid of homesickness, but more just trying to find ways to make it less intense, and that kind of thing. So going more into culture shock, we could think about culture shock as stress because of issues adapting to a new environment. It can also be marked by like a feeling of loss. So it could be like loss of friends, loss of status, and also just loss of belongings, because we form real attachment to things, both physically and relationally with other people. And so a loss could be a big part of it. And then fear of rejection in new culture or a new environment, that could also be part of it. And then anxiety or distress due to cultural differences, that's also a part of culture shock. And feelings of helplessness, which could be part of confusion, frustration, and also feelings of depression. So going more into it, culture shock could look like feeling uneasy and insecure. It could look like feeling of loss, like we talked about, as well as loneliness and sadness and homesickness. Cultural identity confusion could be a big part of it too, because if you move to a new place, you're going through a lot of new experiences, and that's going to change who you are as a person, most likely. And you're kind of learning about a new culture, most likely. And so that can bring up a lot of cultural identity confusion, which can be distressing at times. Social withdrawal could be a big part of it, just because if you're feeling a lot of emotions, so social withdrawal might be a way of dealing with that. Changes in eating and sleeping, irritability, and self-doubt is also another big one. So feeling kind of low self-esteem or self-doubt. So we'll talk a bit about homesickness now, and I'm just curious, and we could just put little things in the chat too if you want, or just shout some things out. What do you think happens when you feel homesick? Sad.
It's a mixture of feelings. I mean, there are a lot of feelings. You feel sad, you feel stressed,
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you have lost something.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I left home I left home in search of another home, and I found myself, having home, you know what I'm saying? So that was when I felt homesick.
Yeah. And that's really a tough position to be in, feeling like the home that you once knew, maybe you don't relate to it the same way as you used to. At the same time, you're trying to build a home here. And I think that feeds to that cultural identity confusion that can come up for sure. Well, thank you. So homesickness, we could think about it as distress caused by separation of home and attachments. Because if we think about it, it's not just separation from your physical house, but it's the attachments you have to the house, like the memories. That's really what brings up emotion, or attachments to people and even physical things like we talked about. And this can cause anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. And I wanted to talk about, there's research that looked at risk factors for homesickness, and I think it's just good to think about. So we could think about risk factors as things that are likely to lead to homesickness or have been found to. And one of the things is language differences. So if you're moving to a place that has a different language than the one you grew up with, then that's a risk factor, because it's just another layer of something you have to adjust to, because there's already a lot to adjust to, and that's just another layer of it. And then cultural differences for similar reasons, and environmental differences too. So if you're if you're moving somewhere where there's a different climate, that's another thing to adjust to on top of everything else. As well, if you grew up in a rural area and then you're moving to a city, I mean, that's a very different environment, and that kind of thing. And then political differences too. So there's very different political climates. And then also depending what the political climate is at home and what's going on there, that can feed into homesickness. And then what the political climate is like here, that can also feed into homesickness if that's something that's affecting you. And I think that's something that's been relevant for people. And then changes in responsibilities and reputation. So for a lot of people, when they move away, they might have had certain responsibilities with their family, or they might have had certain roles in family, but as you move away, you probably can't meet those responsibilities in the way that you used to. And so that's a change as well. And then also just having less social support because you've just moved here. And so you're still building connections, and that's something that we'll talk about. But having less social support is a risk factor for homesickness. And then uncomfortable experiences with negative stereotypes or racism or discrimination. I think when we undergo experiences that are harmful, like discrimination, we have that natural tendency to want to be in a safe place and to be with safe people. And so it can be really hard if you're far away from what feels safe. And then social anxiety is another risk factor, because we'll talk about this more later, but building social connections is really a big protective factor against homesickness. And so if social anxiety is something that you struggle with, it's going to be another layer of something that will make it challenging to build those connections. And so I think it would be important to find ways to cope with social anxiety, because that will feed into the homesickness as well. And then also little experience away from home. So if this is your first time living away from home, I think it's totally normal that you're going to probably experience more homesickness just because it's your first time. And for a lot of firsts, it can be difficult. And then I wanted to talk about the recovery and adjustment phase 2 that we talked about earlier with that graph, just to kind of talk about what it looks like. Or what it typically looks like for people. So in this phase, as we call it, we could expect increased self-confidence. So earlier we talked about self-doubt, but in this phase we could talk about more self-confidence, or expect more self-confidence, and then more motivation as well. And then increased cultural knowledge and sensitivity, expanded social networks and ideas, and then also we could expect flexibility. So we'll talk a bit more now about what we can do about this, things to keep in mind as we're navigating these challenges, ways to cope, and recommendations and things like that. So one thing that research has looked into is this thing called personal growth initiative. And personal growth initiative is defined as a strong desire to grow and work to develop personal talents and abilities. And they found that international students who score high on personal growth initiative were more likely to reframe stressors as opportunities for growth, which can help with adjustment. And so when we're thinking about personal growth initiative, that can look like playfulness. So when I think about playfulness, that could be like willingness to try new things and activities, readiness for change. So thinking about what areas of your life you could change for the better, and being ready, feeling like you're ready to do that and motivated to do that, and then having intention to make changes. So just as an example, if you're finding it challenging to connect with American students because of language barriers, thinking about how this can be reframed. For example, maybe looking at it as an opportunity to learn about different worldviews or perspective, or as an opportunity to practice English and things like that. And then when we're thinking about personal growth initiative, thinking about how this can play out. So joining clubs and trying out different things, activities, which can in turn lead to more social connections. And then another thing that research has looked into, which can play a factor into cultural adjustment, is multicultural open-mindedness. And this can be marked by different things. And when we think about multicultural open-mindedness, it's thought about as appreciation for cultural diversity, both with some similarities and differences. And they found that international students that show more multicultural open-mindedness experienced easier adjustment. Having openness to cross-cultural friendships
that's something we'll talk about more in a bit. And then curiosity and openness too. So another thing that research has found is really focusing on strengths, because when we're feeling in any kind of negative way, and I think homesickness is a part of that, there's a tendency to focus on the negative. We're kind of looking at the bad side of things. And so intentionally focusing on the strengths that you have can be something that's helpful. So first of all, thinking about what are your personal strengths? When you think about your strengths, like, are you a kind person? Are you a good listener? Things like that. And then thinking about your multicultural strengths too. And that could be, for example, like cultural sensitivity, or if you speak more than one language, I think that's something to celebrate. And then thinking about what are ways that you can use your strengths to help with the challenges and the adjustment issues that you're facing. And then reframing the challenges as opportunities for growth. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Yeah, good journaling ideas. So if you like journaling. And then another thing that research has found is that self-compassion is a protective factor against homesickness, and against intense feelings of homesickness. And when we think about self-compassion, this includes self-kindness. It includes the feeling of common humanity, so realizing that we're all human, and challenges and feelings are normal and part of our humanness. And then mindfulness, which basically just refers to being present and that kind of thing. And we'll do an activity on self-compassion in just a minute. So just to kind of summarize everything we talked about, I thought I would make a slide with some recommendations. So the first one is focusing on your strengths, because like I talked about, when we're feeling bad and homesick is a part of that, there's a tendency to focus on the negative, which makes us less likely to take initiative and to feel less motivated and that kind of thing. And then joining campus clubs and activities. I mean, there are, I think, 400 plus clubs, I think. And the other thing too is that you can make your own club. And that's a way to meet people that have a common interest as you. And that's a good way to make friends. And then, like I mentioned before, making friends with American students and other international students. So I think, there is comfort that comes with making friends with people that come from the same culture as us. And I think that's really important. I know that's been important for me too, but at the same time, making friends with American students kind of opens up opportunities to learn more about culture in that way, and then to increase social support here. And so that's something to think about as well. And then finding opportunities to practice English as needed. And then also just remembering that what you're experiencing is normal, and it's a normal part of adjustment. Going back to that graph that we talked about, looking at cultural adjustment is completely normal. And keeping in touch with friends and family at home, which obviously can be difficult with time difference, but it's really important to make time for that. And then taking care of yourself, your sleep hygiene, your eating habits and that kind of thing. And then finding people to talk to who have had similar experiences as you. I think that's really important too. And then talking to people, whether that's a counselor, and I'll talk about the counseling center later, or friends and loved ones too. So I talked a bit about self-compassion, so I thought it'd be cool to do a self-compassion activity. And this self-compassion activity is called How Would You Treat a Friend? Because a lot of the time, we aren't as compassionate with ourselves as we are with other people. It's one of those interesting things about being human. So we'll do one kind of together first. So it starts with a friend situation, and then we'll talk about how we would respond to that friend. Would anyone like to read?
Your friend Vikram moved to the US for college 1 year ago from India. He is now a sophomore. Vikram has been feeling bad about himself for not making as many friends as he feels like he should have by now. Vikram is missing home, his friends, and family. He misses the food back home as well.
So thinking about so if Vikram was your friend, what would you say to him? And
if anyone online wants to put things in the chat too, you can do that.
Well, tell him it's okay, to be okay. It's a phase. You're gonna feel okay, it's gonna be all right. Try to learn something from this. And build your better me from this whole thing. I would also share some personal experience and tell him that I went through the same thing too, and that's a part of the process.
Yeah. And what tone do you think you would use with him?
Very friendly.
Yeah, for sure. So that's how you would talk to a friend. And I imagine we all probably would be really supportive, as you were. And I like that you validated his feelings and then tried to offer helpful advice to you, and then that you relate to him. I thought that was really cool. So the next thing we can do is another part of the activity. It's similar to how you would treat a friend, except you could think about my situation. So thinking about something that you've struggled with in terms of cultural adjustment. And then, and I also have pen and paper if anyone wants. And then thinking about what your response would be. So if anyone wants to write things down or take a minute. I'll give you like a couple minutes. Maybe another minute. Okay. I know this could be personal stuff, so we don't have to talk about anything we don't want to talk about, obviously, but I'm just curious if anyone wants to share some of the situations that they feel like they had and then what their responses were. And feel free to jump in the chat too. Or how was it doing the activity? What was that like? Was it easy? Was it hard? It was easy.
I didn't write anything that was just thinking about what I would share.
Mhm.
I think, like personally, I've done a lot of thinking about this and I've done a lot of reflection. So, I think it was easy to think about that. I mean, it was easy right now, but like in the past, it was difficult to even think about that. But once I did a lot of reflection on it, it's becoming easier.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is kind of like, we could think about self-compassion as having like a muscle. And if you're not practicing a lot of it, or if it's like your first time working that muscle out, it can be hard. And it can be small, like my arm. But the more you practice it, stronger it'll be. And so it seems like you've experienced some of that. That's cool. How about for y'all? How was it?
Fairly easy, but not something about it.
Mhm. Yeah. Cool. Anyone want to share some of the situations? You don't have to go into it too much, but I'm just curious. No. Okay, that's all right. Well, thank you for doing that. You can do that when you go home too, and you can keep working on it. And this is something you can do on your own as well. And if there's anything I'd like you to take away, it's probably this, amongst other things. And then also just thinking about, are you talking to yourself differently than you would talk to a friend? When you're reflecting on that, is the tone that you're using the same or different? Because sometimes, like I was saying before, we could be really harsh on ourselves. And even just thinking about the tone you're using. I know I probably would never talk to my friends the way I talk to myself sometimes. So it's just something to think about. And then I thought we'd go into some resources too. You might already be aware of some of these, but thought I would go through it. So I learned about this recently. So there is a student organization called International Connect, and they try to help with the transition of international students at the university. And they provide tips on living here, practicing English, and they have lots of social events and outings and things like that. It is a Christian group, but they are open to anyone. Especially if they're interested in learning more about Christianity and that kind of thing. So that's something to think about if you'd be interested. And I'm sure you probably know already about the International Student Scholar Services. And then I don't know if you've had a chance to look through these, but there's a few student organizations that are internationally minded. So there's also a, what do you call that again? QR code, thank you. If you want to look at it online, but yeah, there's quite a few of them. And then also just keeping in mind that you could make one too. If there's something that you feel like is missing, you could totally make one. So just putting that out there. And then also I did want to talk a bit about the counseling center. So like I mentioned before, I work at the counseling center, And we do individual therapy, we have groups as well, and then we'll do outreach as well. And on our website, on the highlighted part, self-help resources, there's also videos on mental health topics and some coping skills for anxiety and things like that. And I think we're putting webinars up there too. Yeah, okay. And so that's a resource for you. And then if you're interested in scheduling individual therapy, I think you go into services on the website and then schedule an initial consultation. So I just wanted to put that out there if you're interested. And then we also have this thing called TAO, Therapy Assistant Online, and there's a QR code here for that. And basically, so you use your student credentials to log in and it's free. And TAO just has a whole lot of videos on different mental health topics, depression, anxiety, you name it. And you can search by topic and that kind of thing, and it's free for you. So I definitely would recommend checking that out if you're interested. And then also I am curious, so if there are services that you would want more of or find helpful from the counseling center, especially. So I put some options here, and this is just like no promises, it's just something that we're thinking about. So one option would be group counseling for like an international student support group. If that's something that you would find interesting, just put it in the chat or let me know. Or presentations and workshops by the counseling center on various topics, if that's something you'd want more of, or international student organizations. So if there's anything that you would want more of or find helpful, just either let me know now or put it in the chat. Anything? Or anything in general that you would want more of. Cool. Oh, did you want to? Oh, okay. Cool. All right, so we're pretty much coming up on the end. I do want you to give feedback for the presentation. So there's a QR code there to give feedback. So if you could please take a couple minutes to do the evaluation and then good to go. And then I'll be here at the end for if you want to talk more individually for questions and comments too.